everyone, and welcome to part two of the Rooted to Rise series, where I get to introduce and spotlight the amazing authors of this amazing book that last time was not even released yet. And I really want to take the opportunity to spotlight Ashley Elizabeth Packard today. She is near and dear to my heart, as many of you know, through all of the podcasts that we do together. But in particularly, I want to spotlight her chapter, and that's all part of being in an anthology. So I first and foremost want to say welcome, Ashley Elizabeth. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing amazing. I love the chance to be back here and talk about this book now that we've had the chance to do the launch and it's out there and we're actually having people who are reading it. So it's really fun to come back with a different perspective the second time around. Thank you so much for hosting it.
I just feel it's so important to capture those moments of right after editing, like all of your words are in the editor's hands. It's going into publishing, all of the things, feel all the feels, share the feels. And then we get to add something super special to this one. Not only is the book out there, people are reading it, people are receiving it, people are learning from it, making choices because of it, but something very rare happened. And within the first 12 hours of this book, we actually became #1 bestsellers on Amazon's personal transformation section. And if you know anything about me and Ashley, we run Transformational Truth Group. And so I intentionally put it out there when I picked this category that this, if anything else, this was where I wanted to hit #1. Not because of publicity, not because of anything else, but really just as a testament to that's what we're putting out into the world. And it was received and we got to celebrate. So Ashley Elizabeth, would you please share with me what that felt like when I was giving updates and da-da-da, and then I think you were at work when it happened. And so please share with us what that felt like.
Yeah, so even just you talking about it, like my heart is racing like all over again because I think there's an element of there's just a surreal nature to it. It I knew from the beginning when I said yes to this book that it was going to be powerful. I knew when I was working with the all the women who are featured in it and got to start seeing their stories, I knew the kind of impact that it was going to had the potential to create. And then I to be in this moment. So no, I wasn't at work. I was actually in the hospital
Oh, that's
with
right.
my dad when it happened. So there, I had a bunch of stuff that was going on in my life, but I had I had the joy of being able to be with my dad while he was in the hospital promoting this book, and it was the sweetest thing ever because anybody who knows my parents knows that these two are like all in when it comes to their kids. And my mom and I were sitting there and we were like messaging people and telling people about it. And they were asking for updates. So Rachelle would be putting updates in our book group. And my mom and dad are like, tell us where it's at. Tell us where it's at. Tell us where it's at. And it was such an unbelievable gift in that moment to be able to sit in that kind of energy, not just for me personally. I mean, for me personally, off the scale on its own of just experiencing something like that and being a part of something that was gaining so much momentum and there was so much just great vibration, great energy that was associated with it. But it was something else entirely to be able to share it with my parents who were so actively like, we had nurses coming into my dad's hospital room who were being told to go get Rooted to Rise because he was so excited about it, you know. It was an unbelievable gift, and to know that these women who put so much time into this, so much effort into this, so much of themselves, and to know that all of our marketing that we put around it was completely authentic. It was just people sharing from their hearts. And then to have people show up, I don't know, it makes me emotional just to think about it right now. But the number of people who reached out to me and they were like, I cannot wait to put my hands on your book. We're so excited for you. We're so proud of you. I can't wait to read the things that you've written. it was an experience unlike anything that I've ever had. It was an incredible day.
That wave of energy, it was hard to fall asleep that night.
No, that's
And
terrible.
the first thing I did the next morning was like keep checking it, and to hold that spot for 3 days was just such a gift because it really showed how much support we
Hmm.
all had. And it showed that it was touching people that we'll never know, was intentionally clicking the yes, purchase, I want all in on this book. And I want to highlight a few things about your chapter specifically. First of all, you part of your chapter was a poem.
Hmm.
And I love your poems. I love how you craft words into just such meaningful messages. They're just so beautiful. And I wanted to share it. It's called The Edge, and it really highlights and introduces you to her chapter of the no longer standing at the edge right here. It was so beautiful. And that in of itself was just a gift within the book. And so I'm very grateful. I One thing that really resonated with me, and I know you're nervous about this because I didn't tell you ahead of time, but as I was reading your chapter, something really stood out to me. It was two sentences, and it was kind of like someone putting a mirror in front of me personally. And I really want to let people know this particular part. And it says, it's the danger of living a life trapped on the edge. Triggers abound that will shake loose what we suppress or attempt to numb. And I would love to create an invitation for you to maybe talk about that if you feel up to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I very much remember, well, I remember writing my whole chapter because it was just done in a flood. And I remember writing that line because that was something, it was a part of me that really had held me back in a lot of ways. And honestly, even as I say held me back, um, I think there's another level to that that was also like an excuse for me holding other people away in that space. And so I've learned over and over, mostly in hard ways, that when you suppress things, or when you pretend like things are okay when they're not, or when you don't give yourself the kind of grace that you need to look at the reality of what's happening, that there is an element of that where we trap ourselves. And sometimes when we leave things in the dark, um, we don't bring them into the light. We want to make sure that they stay in the shadows for whatever reason. And I'm not talking about anything that's, like some deep dark secret of sorts, although it applies to those as well. I'm just talking about things that were inside of me that I didn't want other people to know, things that I thought, I don't know, somehow made me less or not enough, or things that I thought maybe would make people look at me a little bit differently, or I don't know, when we hide those things and when we allow them to stay in the dark, we don't realize that we're trapping ourselves. And the more that we do that, the higher that edge feels, because then it feels scarier, right? I've held on to it for so long. There must have been a reason I held on to it for so long. What happens when I put it in the light now? But then there are always going to be things that show up. I think our bodies tell us in so many different ways when we are suppressing something that we needed to give voice to. And so I know in a lot of ways, my anxiety that I felt, the things that I experienced were as a result of holding parts of me back or keeping others away because of these things that were in my way. And part of the reason that I titled the whole chapter No Longer Standing on the Edge is because part of what I did through personal growth work, but part of what I was able to access once I started actively using CBD was I was able to start putting things in the light. And once I was putting them in the light more and more and more, that's where I accessed a lot of freedom. And then the edge wasn't scary anymore. It was this place where, I could just take off and fly. So I don't know. Those are a lot of things that were in my mind when I wrote that line or those lines.
They just really spoke to me, and it was something that I think is really the message of your entire chapter. And with that being said, how does it feel that it is out there? How does it feel, no longer standing on the edge, but sometimes writing vulnerable things kind of puts us on a different kind of edge. So, how does that feel?
Yeah, I think in the moment, like on that day where we were building all this momentum and this book was doing all the things, I I have such a heart for the women in this book that I don't think I was giving a lot of thought to the me side of it. I so wanted the messages of these other authors in people's hands. I'm like, people they've got to read, Rochelle's story. They've got to see what, Amy is putting out there. They need to hear what Stephanie had to say. They got to read Michelle, like every person I'm just was, and the people that I was reaching out to, even as I was, marketing it on my own, I was so focused on not me in that space. And then I won't forget, I showed up at work, I don't know, several days later, and I had a friend of mine who caught me in the hallway, and she was like, "Ashley, I read your chapter," and immediately it was like, it was jarring because I was like, "What do you mean you read my chapter? Like, I don't even know what you're talking about," which is so ridiculous because I was just in this book, but I was like, you read my chapter?" And they were like, "Yeah, I actually turned to your chapter first. I'm so glad that you shared what you shared." And then I had somebody who showed up in my text messages, and they were like, "I just finished reading your chapter and it really meant a lot to me, that you shared these things. I didn't realize the level of anxiety that you struggled with, and I'm really grateful that you put it out there." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, like that is not that's not attention that I'm used to." Like, I'm very open now and have been for years about my story, but it's usually somebody coming to me with a story of their own, and I share a piece of my story only as it relates to them, because it's not I don't I'm not somebody who typically is like, "Oh, come let it be about me." Um and so it's a very, I don't know, I'm gonna use the word I used earlier, it's a very surreal feeling. And still there are moments where people will say things like, "Oh, our best-selling author over here," and I'm like, "Oh, who are we talking about?" Like, "Oh, right, okay, that's me, hi, okay." So I think the answer to your question is just that I am still like riding a high from all of it, and that I I'm now getting to receive a gift on this other side of it, where there's just a lot of affirmation for what I put into it. And my hope and my prayer when I was writing it was that the people who needed my message, because I knew little me needed my message, like I just wanted it to end up in the right hands. And I feel like I'm continuing to hear that it did. And it's a pretty special place to be.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. I read or listened to somebody say that the opposite of anxiety is trust.
Oh, wow.
And that is a phrase we use in our household when
Yeah.
people are identifying anxious moments.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were able to take your anxiety and trust the process of
Hmm.
what CBD could do for you. You've told numerous people your story in those little chunks that you talked about,
Yeah.
but let's talk about the trust that you put in yourself just to write it.
Hmm.
I asked this in the last interview, and, like, what made you say yes? But now
Hmm.
that you're on the other side, what is your answer your position, your feelings about saying yes, trusting yourself,
Mhm.
trusting me, trusting Wildly Free. What what would you like to share about that? Because I think that what people need to understand is that storytelling is so powerful.
Mhm.
And when you take it and you process it with other people, it's very much a balance of trust.
It
So,
is. I would agree. And it's funny as you were talking about that, even before you had said it, when you were talking about, trusting myself in the process, I honestly think that the truth is I trusted Wildly Free first
mm,
before I trusted me. I felt a pull in me. I knew I had a story. I knew that it was a story that I had shared in bits and pieces before. I knew that, but I trusted Wildly Free to, I don't know, hold my story where it needed to be held. And I also trusted them to allow me to show up imperfectly. So I've been a writing teacher for a really long time. I've written since I was a little girl. I love writing. I am very rarely the first person to then turn around and share that writing publicly. And so I think when it comes to something like this, trusting Wildly Free, trusting you, trusting James, those things came first. And then as we showed up to meetings and there was momentum that was being built around like the theme of this book, and people were starting to share like, okay, I think my chapter is going to be about this, or I think my chapter is going to be about that. And just as that was building, I that was my trust in me was growing because I was hearing other people talk about these things. I'm like, yes, no, I think I do. I have something to add to this. I have something to bring to the table here. And then the day that I wrote my chapter, I even remember touching base with you several times, being like, okay, I think I'm going to go for it. Okay, I'm in it. And then it was like just a total blitz moment. And at the end, I was like, okay, I'm done. I just hit send. I just hit send. But I think my trust in myself, and I think this is something that I would tell anybody thinking about writing either a story of their own or thinking about being a part of an anthology, is that I think oftentimes we think we have to be ready before we say yes to something. And the reality is, I could trust you guys to know that I was ready when the time was right. And when I busted out my chapter, there was work that had been done and I was ready. And to this day, there are still parts of me that are like, gosh, even if you were to ask me in this moment right now, like, were you ready to write this? I don't know that that answer was ever like, yes. But the answer is also yes, because I was able to trust the process and I was able to trust then myself as I was leaning into it, but I felt like I was in a safe space. And that was everything.
well, I love that you shared that because I think what's super important to me is that people feel like they're being treated, seen and heard as a human, as a person, and not as a business transaction or to hurry
Oh,
up and get the book done. To speed up
yeah.
a process is not a process. It's an
Mm-hmm.
expectation that we put on
Yeah.
people. And I know when I I was thinking about what was important to me, it was to create a safe environment for people to step into something not already ready to, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I start off every anthology with life is going to get really weird and challenging, and everything's going to make you want to pull out of saying yes and all of the things, and it's going to derail you, and it's gonna make the process, it's going to try to steal your joy away from the process. But I want people to know that first and foremost,
Yeah.
so that it's not a shock
Mm-hmm.
and that you can reflect back on that. And I'm so grateful that you said yes before you were ready. I knew, I knew, I knew when I created the invitation months ahead of time who was ready and who was not. And those were the people that landed. And so it was such a special thing to do this, not only as an author, but you also got to dip your feet into the editing of it, and then fell into becoming one of the editors for Wildly Free. Please share what that kind of feels like, because none of us saw any of this happening in terms of there's always opportunities within opportunities within opportunities. Please share with us what that feels like.
Yeah, so 16 years as an educator. I've done a lot of editing of middle school writing. That has been a space that I have occupied. When James first was talking to me and I got to dip my toes into editing this book, honestly, I remember because I even got to craft the poem that's at the beginning of Rooted to Rise. And I was able to go in and I got to read the raw, unedited versions of everybody's chapter. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember sitting in that space and being so, it's gonna make me cry just talking about it. So utterly humbled that I had the gift of these people's hearts, like sitting there on a page in front of me. They're like these precious, these precious stories that were sitting there in this untapped, untouched version. And I'll never forget reading those and just honestly being in awe of the fact that I got to occupy that space. And then when James reached out and he was like, "Hey, would you like to, put eyes on some of these and stuff like that?" I totally had an imposter syndrome moment. Like, you want me to be the one that is like doing this, with you, and not because I don't know. It wasn't like a sense of not enoughness. It was just like, how could it be that you're seeing something in me that you think is going to help in this? And then I got to do it. And I was so fired up about it. I was like, yes, I love doing this. I love being able to talk to people and like encourage them in their writing and draw out their stories and figure out which way to go. And then you guys offered me the chance to be an editor for Wildly Free. And now I've been able to be a part of editing really two things. I got to be a little bit a part of editing the workbook that James wrote and put together for potential authors. And that was so fun. I love I'm such a naturally collaborative person. I'm better in community. And so to process that and work through that with him, every time we got off a call, I was like so fired up and, being able to leave comments and stuff for that. I'm like, oh, this is giving me so much life. Right. And then I got to do it for your book. And I just kept having these moments of like, is this really something that I get to do? Because I always have, and I get this visual in my head a lot, but I have this vision of like cradling people's stories because I just look at them as they are just they're so precious. And I know what gets put into them. And it doesn't matter if you're my middle schoolers or if you're, an adult who's been walking the earth for ages. I now get to sit in a space where I know that if nothing else, what I'm going to bring to it is a loving set of eyes and a perspective that all I really want to do is help you draw out this story that's sitting inside of you. And I want to be able to ask questions and to push you in such a way that by the time that you're finished, you have this thing in front of you that started from this outpouring of you and then just ended up growing and growing to the point where you're ready to like share it with the world. And so I feel so blessed that I get to be a part of Wildly Free as an editor and as a writing coach. It's nothing that I will ever take for granted.
And marketer, like you're in marketing, your hands are in all of it. Your heart shows up in all of the spaces, and it's totally apparent with that. So I'm excited to also talk about the fact that this is just book one
That is,
of, well,
who
say
knows?
trilogy. We'll see what happens, but we're about to invite people to
Mm-hmm,
apply to be in book two.
mm-hmm.
And the gathering, the informational meetings just days away. What
Yeah.
would you tell someone who's sitting on the fence of whether they even want to show up to the meeting
Mhm.
or reach out to one of us or say yes before they're ready, what would you tell people for book
Yeah.
number two?
So the first thing I would say is show up to the meeting. You can't lose anything showing up to the meeting. Show up to the meeting. Like, be in the energy. Experience what it is. I feel like the biggest thing though that I would tell, I mean, I'm not kidding about that, but the biggest thing that I would tell people is to stop saying no to you, like yourself. You know, I think so many times in our lives we are overly hard on ourselves. And, I reached out and I invited some people already to this meeting. And, I have people that are on my heart for it. And I just can't count how many times already. And that included people who are in this current book that hit number one. There were people who showed up to this meeting, our first meeting, and they were like, but I'm not a writer. I've never written anything before. I've never had anything published before. I don't know what I'm doing here. And they are in this book that hit number one. Their stories are going to be read by people. And so I think I would just tell people to like quit counting yourself out before you even know what the race looks like. Like I just don't I it makes me think of yearbook expiration data. No, just this concept that like nobody's promised tomorrow, right? And one of the things that has been hitting me hard, for years, there's a song, I think it's by, I'm not even gonna say who it's by because I'm gonna get it wrong, but it's called like Didn't Do, it's a country song. And it's like essentially the gist of it is I know that at the end of my life I'm gonna regret more of what I didn't do than more of what I did. And I think so many of us, so much of the time, we look at something and we have it like painted in this way in our head that is unattainable, right? That's not for me. I don't belong at that table. It wasn't for me. I'm going to go ahead and make sure to count myself out now because that way somebody else can't count me out. I've done the audit and I came up short, so I'm going to go ahead and sit over here. And the reality is that is not, it's not true. It's not true. And I would just tell you to come and be in this space and not say no until you have heard what it is. The reality is maybe this is not your time. That's an okay place to be. Maybe this is something that I'm going to do later. Maybe this is something that plants a seed for something that happens years down the road. I'm not saying you're not going to come to this meeting and feel pressured. Nothing about Wildly Free is anything but invitation without expectation. So like come to the meeting, right? But then while you're listening, I just would encourage you not to, I think we write stories for ourselves all the
Yeah.
time, right? And so don't let the story that you tell yourself be, well, everybody who was in the first book, like they'd probably already been published before. Or everybody who was in the first book, they knew what they were doing. Oh, everybody who was in the first book, like none of those things are true, right? But we tell ourselves that so that we can step away. The reality is a whole bunch of us did not know what we were doing. Actually, I would say most of us probably didn't know what we were doing. I think all of the women would be totally fine with me saying that, and we did it anyway. And we went scared. And yeah, here we are on the other side. Just don't count yourself out. Don't say no before you really have an understanding of what it could be. And I just don't think you lose anything by showing up. If nothing else, you're showing up for you. Information never hurt anybody.
And that goes for
Information
all
is
the
power.
opportunities. Yeah, and that goes for all the opportunities, not just necessarily like book two, but just really everything. And I am so like out there. I will be the first to tell you I have no clue what I'm doing,
Mhm.
but I still do it and it still turns out beautiful. And I think that the message for everyone to hear is that saying yes to yourself doesn't mean you're equipped for the outcome because the outcome will come through the journey.
Mhm.
And it's really, I am just, thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate everything that you shared today. And I want to open it up for any other energy messages that you want to share because this this is your space to be able to talk about whatever's on your heart. And I couldn't script questions to ask because the spaces that we are in while we write stories, while we write anthologies. A lot of people don't even know what an anthology is, and it's a collection of stories. And everyone's voice is so powerful, but collaboratively, collectively, we are even more powerful together. And that's, I think, the power of energy, of community, of tribe, of whatever you want to call it. And so I want you to share anything else that might be on your heart right now as we wrap up this
Yeah.
beautiful time together.
As you were saying all of that, there definitely is. No, the other thing that was on my heart is just to stay out of the spirit of competition. And
Mm,
I don't even mean that in like you versus me kind of way, but I think we often think like, do I really have a story to tell? You know, and or is my story really valuable enough to like be in a space like this? I was talking to somebody the other day and they were like, well, I mean, I don't really know where my story, fits within the context of something like that or um whatever. And I think that they say that like comparison is the thief of joy in a
yeah.
lot of ways. And so I think when you step into a space like this, and I know that we've even talked about that with the authors that we've been speaking with who are starting their journey with Wildly Free, it is not about you compared to everybody else, even within an anthology. It's not about my story compared to the woman's stories next to me. It's just about my story. And it doesn't have to be my story in relation to all these other stories that are out there in the world. The fact of the matter is that somebody needs my story. And that feels like a really weighty thing to say. Like that sits heavy on my heart. But I know that somebody needs your story. And I know that there's going to be somebody listening to this podcast who's like, do I really have something to add? And I just want you to hear unequivocally that the answer is yes. Like somebody needs your story, and it doesn't matter how small you think it is, because there are people out there who are living something that you're living, or is a older version of you, and you figured out some kind of solution, some kind of answer, some kind of way forward, and you could help to cut their journey, the struggle. You could help to cut that down, right? It's like the power of learning from each other is what accelerates us in life, right? I don't have to learn everything the hard way. I can like read some things from other people or, experience the stories in the pages of a book and be changed in a way that'll move me forward in healthier, better, more powerful ways. And so I guess just in all the things that we've been talking about, I hope that somebody is going to hear this. Somebody's going to pick up Rooted to Rise. Somebody's going to pick up another book by Wildly Free Publishing, and they're going to realize that there's space for their story too. I think it's really important. I think the work that we do here is really important. That's what's on my heart.
Thank you. I love hearing from your heart. Your heart always speaks first. So I love that. And to, say something, to add something to that, that's also like as wildly free, it's in the name, be wildly free. But, it's also important that like we as a publishing group, we're
Mm-hmm.
not in competition with other publishers as well. I
Yep.
can't tell you, sometimes people come and say, oh, well, what do you think about this publisher? And da, da, da. That's the beauty of publishing. We all get to do it the way we feel is best.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, no one's really right or wrong. It's just who do you align with?
Mm-hmm.
Who, all of that, because I know that not everyone is going to align with everything that we believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, like you said, like it's not a competition. Life should never be a competition. It shouldn't be this versus that. It, for me, and I think that this comes through with all the chapters within Rooted to Rise, is that they found balance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's balance, 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 balance. Like the message in so many different parts is find your balance. And
Mm-hmm.
that includes healing so much more than just like physical things or mental things, but like how to extract the positive of everything we've learned in life and take all the negative and turn it into something better. A better understanding of ourselves allows us to have a better understanding of others. And so thank you so much, Ashley Elizabeth. I appreciate you so much on so many levels. And I just really am honored that I get to sit in these spaces with you. So thank you so much for being a part of this book and so much of the future of Wildly Free as a whole. So, all right,
Yeah,
everyone,
I
thank
love
you
it.
for listening. And we just really appreciate you guys just being in the spaces with us as well. So thank you so much, everyone.
Absolutely. Go out and get your Rooted to Rise copy.
Oh, yes. Oh, I see, like totally lost in the space. Ashley, how can they order this from you? Because
Oh,
I feel like it is so important that, especially with anthologies, that we empower the individuals. They become authors. They become, you go into the Library of Congress, which is something that a lot of people don't do for anthologies. So we want to create authors with voices, and that gets extended through buying the book. So, Ashley,
yeah.
how can they buy this from you?
So I have copies available for sale on my website, choosesomethingbetter.com.
All
So
right.
anybody who wants one, they can go grab it there and it gets shipped with love from me.
And that's the best part, in my
It
opinion.
is.
Okay,
It is.
now we just get so lost in our passion for everything. So again, thank you everyone for listening, and I can't wait. We would appreciate any feedback, comments, or anything that you have about this book, so that we can share it with others. So thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.